Okay, we are starting our Numbers 3 study, and why don't we start with prayer? Want to do that? I'm not going to have you pray. It's okay. We'll go ahead and start with prayer. Lord Jesus, thank you for the time that we get to open in your word today. We do pray for, as we were praying earlier, that you would fill us to overflowing, Lord, and that the insights that we would have would be coming from you, that any sort of ministry that would go forth would be seen as from you, and that you would be glorified, that it would just satisfy that thirst that we have, but that we would continue to have a hunger and a thirst for you all the more, Jesus. And we praise you, and it's in your name we ask these things. Amen. Amen. Okay, so we're last time we looked at the camp of Israel and how it was surrounding the tabernacle. In the very middle of the camp, remember, was the tabernacle, and at the very middle of the tabernacle, or in this toward the back part, is where God dwelt. That was where the Shekinah glory of God was, in the Holy of Holies. And we're going to touch on this a little bit, but on the first day of the first month in the second year, so the Israelites had been there at Mount Sinai for about, pretty close to a year, and they had been building the utensils and everything for the tabernacle, the actual structure itself. And then on the first day, they began to make offerings. They set up the tabernacle, and they began to make offerings for the consecration of the priests. And it was specifically a 7-day long time that they were set apart. The priests, and specifically Aaron, were set apart, and they were offering sacrifices for themselves, consecrating themselves unto the Lord. And then we come to the 8th day of that month. So the first month of on the 8th day on the second year. So again, this is not even a full year after the Passover that had taken place back in Egypt when they left. Almost a year, not quite a year, but the tabernacle's built, they consecrate the priesthood, and then we come to where we're going to kind of pick up today, talking about Nadab and Abihu. So it starts in verse 1. These are the generations of Aaron and Moses in the day that the Lord spake with Moses in Mount Sinai. And these are the names of the sons of Aaron: Nadab the firstborn, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. And these are the names of the sons of Aaron, the priests which were anointed, whom he consecrated to minister in the priest's office. And verse 4, and Nadab and Abihu died before the Lord when they offered strange fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they had no children. And Eleazar and Ithamar ministered in the priest's office in the sight of Aaron their father. So this sort of is a throwback to Leviticus chapter 10, where Nadab and Abihu, backing up from this, so you had the consecration of the priests, which of course would include Nadab, Abihu, Ithamar, and Eleazar, and then Ithamar, in addition to Aaron. And they're getting ready to enter into the priesthood, to do the work of the priesthood. And they had made their offerings for themselves, burnt offerings, consecration for themselves, to be set apart for the work of the Lord. And they're just getting ready to get going. And so it's the 8th day, and this is all done, this is all taken place. And what ends up happening is the glory of God falls and ends up in the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle, in the holiest section there. And then out from there came fire, and it ended up consuming the burnt offering that was on the altar. So it's just an awesome thing. And this is what they had been waiting for. This is really what they had been waiting for. They had Mount Sinai, they received the law, everything was going on. They build the tabernacle, everything is happening, and they have the priesthood consecrated, and the Lord is now with them in the tabernacle for when they make these offerings, and then they would be able to take them into the Holy of Holies once a year and so on. Day 8 happens after all of this takes place, and then day 8 happens, and the Lord shows up, and it's a glorious thing. Well, right after that, everyone is shouting, everyone is praising God, and then Nadab and Abihu, who are Aaron's first 2 sons, they end up taking their censers and they end up putting fire in them and then incense. And so they don't even go to the altar itself. Remember, they are just outside of that area, and the Lord has consumed the sacrifice. The fire has come down and it's consumed it, and the people are able to watch from outside, but they see everything that's going on, that the sacrifice is consumed. So Nadab and Abihu, while all this cheering is going on, they end up taking their censers and they put coals in them. No one knows where they got these coals. And no one knows where they got this incense, but normally you would take the coals from the altar and then take them into the altar of incense, put it there with the incense, and then right there at the Holy of Holies is where you would have the aroma of the glory of God being ministered to with this incense. And you see a picture, it's a very simple picture. You might throw that up here in a second. There, Ted. But you have the picture of the Holy of Holy area there in that center block, or toward the back. The square is where the Ark of the Covenant is. So what they do, though, is they end up taking this fire and they end up going in toward the tabernacle with it, or in toward the tent of meeting itself, and then the Lord just consumes them. Hits them with fire, the same fire that came and took the burnt offering now comes out and kills them. What a horrible thing that happens. They're all celebrating that the glory of God is in their midst, and they're worshiping. You can pull it down here in a minute, but that the glory of God is in their midst, and all of these things are going on, and then all of a sudden it just shuts down. All of the worship stops, because Nadab and Abihu are torched and their bodies are left for dead there as a result. It goes from just glorifying God and praising Him to now just a total killer for the worship. Which I think when we went through this, back when we were in Leviticus chapter 10, that the emphasis there was that the Lord prescribes worship in a certain way, and there are times when we'll want to accentuate it or add to it, and you could be full of good intentions to do that, but if you try to add to what God has prescribed for worship, then you end up actually killing the worship, or getting killed in the worship, is what happened to these guys. So it ended up just completely wiping out the worship experience, and that's what they're talking about here in verse 4. Nadab and Abihu died before the Lord, and they offered strange fire. Another aspect of this that they were involved in, and it's implied later in Leviticus chapter 10. So the first 3 verses talk about Nadab and Abihu going in. God bless you. But then in verse 10, it specifically talks about not ministering with wine or strong drink. So it's sort of implied that Nadab and Abihu may have been under the influence when they had done this. And maybe it was all the celebration. Maybe it was they got through all the consecration of the first 7 days, and so the 8th day they're ready to go, and they might have been under the influence and they're trying to minister, and then they end up doing something that clouds their judgment, which is exactly what happens within sobriety. It doesn't make you make absolutely always horrendous decisions. It just clouds your judgment, and then you get horrendous consequences as a result. And so, anyway, so that's what happened with Nadab and Abihu. So from here on out, we'll pretty much just be hearing about Eleazar and Ithamar. Eleazar would be the third born, but he's now the first because the other 2 had died. One other thing, I have some notes here about this, that that relates to worship as God prescribes. And you'll remember that Cain had an offering. Both Cain and Abel had an offering. Abel's offering, it was implied that it was an atonement offering for themselves, and so Abel brought his offering, and it was the offering from his flock, and Cain brought his offering, but the offering was a grain offering, which there's not generally a problem with grain offering, but without shedding of blood there is no remission of sins. So the grain offering wasn't sufficient to cover him, and he could have certainly gotten a hold of a lamb to offer, or a bull, or whatever else some sort of blood offering, but he didn't do that. So God looked down on his. In fact, it specifically says that he didn't respect his offering. So again, I've talked to people about, well, what about intentions? If you have good intentions in the way or the manner in which you make an offering to God or do anything for the Lord, that just because you have good intentions, if it's not according to what God prescribes, then it's not respected. It's inadequate. There are many people that want to know who God is, but they don't really want to go through the way of Jesus Christ. And John 14:6, we know, is very specific that I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. Everybody has to pass through Jesus Christ, no matter how well-intentioned they are to worship God, that they have to pass through Jesus Christ. They have to acknowledge who He is and place their faith and trust in Him. And people could argue that. They could say, oh, well, that's not fair. Well, it wasn't fair, so to speak, that Nadab and Abihu were killed. From our standpoint, they may have been of the best intentions. They might have been seeking glory themselves, which sort of implies that they were. But nevertheless, they died. You have another example of this where you have, you'll remember the Philistines had gotten a hold of the ark because Eli's sons decided to, Israel wasn't winning in battle, so they said, well, why don't we take the ark? So Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, they decide to take the ark into battle against the Philistines. And you'll remember these guys, they had been carousing, and they had been involved in a lot of sexual misconduct with the girls of Israel and so on. So they were wicked, and the word actually came to Eli, and Eli never did anything about it. So even though he's the guy where the Ark of the Covenant is, and he's the go-to for the priesthood, so to speak, he wasn't dealing with his sons. So nevertheless, Israel's getting they're getting beat in these little battles. So what ends up happening, they say, well, let's take the Ark of the Covenant on in there. And so they take the Ark of the Covenant in, and then they end up, both Hophni and Phinehas, end up getting killed, and then the Ark of the Covenant ends up getting taken by the Philistines. So the Philistines now have the Ark of the Covenant, and now they thought, man, our weapon, Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you just get the Ark of the Covenant, you'll win the battle, right? No, it only works for Israel, and really it's not, with the exception of, going around Jericho, you generally don't engage the ark in battle, all right? Unless the Lord specifically tells you to, you just leave it where it's supposed to be for purposes of worship. So, all of that said, what ends up happening? Well, the Philistines are seeing that it's not working for them. Their God, they put it there in front of their God Dagon, and then they go in put it there at night, and then the next morning Dagon's fallen down, their God's fallen down worshiping at the Ark of the Covenant, so they have to put their God back up, their fish god, and then the next day it comes, and then it ends up falling down, and its limbs are broken off of it. So they're saying this isn't working, and everywhere the Ark is, people are coming down with these tumors and plagues, and they're being infested with mice, all this, rats and rodents and stuff like that. It's just problems. So they said, let's just get rid of these things. So they take these two two milk cows, and then they put the ark on a cart, and then they just say, just have it go and go back, and as long as it doesn't go in the wrong direction, just make sure it goes toward Israel, and let's just be done with it. So the people in Israel, they end up coming to it. I can see if I've got the I've got a note on this as far as who they were that found it. Let me see if I can find the note here. Beth Shemesh, that's it. So the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, they get this and they say, wow, this is awesome. There's the Ark of the Covenant, and it's rolling up with these two cows, and they see it, and then they look upon it, and even though they have it, what ends up happening? 70,000, or no, 70, not 70,000, but 70 inhabitants of Beth Shemesh who looked upon the Ark of the Covenant died. And it's just like, well, isn't that good intentions? What's up with that? They're excited that the Ark of the Covenant's coming, but God doesn't want people, with the exception of the high priest, to look upon the Ark of the Covenant or to have any dealings with it. So what ends up happening, they end up taking it into the house of, who was it? It was, I've got that too. Abinadab, that's right. They put it into the house of Abinadab. For 20 years it stays there. And then David says, he says, well, let's go ahead and bring the ark out and bring it into a place of worship. So what they do is they end up taking the ark and putting it back on a cart again. And it's being pulled, and while it's being pulled, then the oxen that are pulling it hits this section where it loses balance, and there's one man, Uzzah, who puts his hand out that fast, dies. And so it's just like, oh no, someone touches it again, and so again, there's a prescription for how the Lord intends. It's supposed to be held by who? The Levites, right? The Levites, specifically the Koathites, they're supposed to be carrying this on the staves. It shouldn't even have been in a cart, but they're supposed to be carrying it. So what ends up happening is Uzzah dies, and again, that kills the worship. Everyone is rejoicing over all of this, and then he ends up touching it, it kills him, and then it just ruins, here he's best intentions, right? The ark's going to fall. So he puts his hand out to steady it so that it doesn't fall off of the cart. And yet again, just because what we would see as best intentions or a right thing or an okay thing, God has his righteousness and his holiness. And again, to bring this all back around to the idea of we need to be very sensitive to what the Word of God says, and to be careful with it, that we're not, just as we see in the book of Revelation at the end, that we're not adding or that we're not subtracting from the Word of God, but that we're looking at it and we're being very careful with respect to how we view the Word of God and how we implement the Word of God in our lives. And again, you can even say Ananias and Sapphira, even when they're full of hypocrisy, they were, they blew it by lying and being deceitful. But they could have just taken what they had and given it, but their best intention was still lying to the Holy Spirit because they wanted some of the glory out of it as a result, and so God killed them as well. So where we're supposed to be very careful. All right, so that is all about Nadab and Abihu. I get into this because the rest of this is going to get into what some of the duties are of the Levites and how the breakdown is in their specific duties. It actually goes into it with more detail in chapter 4, and I'd intended on maybe doing chapter 4, depending upon how we're doing tonight. We may touch on that, but we'll probably save that for next time. So in verse 5, it goes on and it says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Bring the tribe of Levi near, and present them before Aaron the priest, that they may minister unto him." So Aaron is a Levite, but now Aaron has the charge of overseeing all the Levites, and more specifically, that would end up being delegated, the oversight, to his son Eleazar. But what's interesting is Aaron himself being a Levite, now their job is to serve Aaron. That's he as the high priest, and as Levites, their role is to serve Aaron. So this is where we see it in verse 6. Present them before Aaron the priest, that they may minister unto him. And then it goes on in verse 7, and they shall keep his charge and the charge of the whole congregation before the tabernacle of the congregation, to do service of the tabernacle. And they shall keep all the instruments of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the charge of the children of Israel to do the service of the tabernacle. And thou shalt give the Levites unto Aaron and to his sons. They are wholly given unto him out of the children of Israel, and they shall appoint Aaron and his sons, and they shall wait on their priest's office, and the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death. We'll talk about that just briefly, but anybody, any stranger that comes near, and normally a stranger, when you're making reference, that's talking about Gentiles. A Gentile that comes near to the tabernacle, they're going to be killed. But really, this is anybody that isn't the priesthood, anybody that isn't the Levites, specifically, that comes near the tabernacle, especially as they come through the eastern portion, or the one way, the one door, which again, Jesus was tabernacling among us. So you notice that contrary to like the city of Jerusalem that had all these gates all around, the way to the Holy of Holies, there's only one way, and that's through Jesus Christ. That's him himself. He's the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except by him. He's the door that everybody has to pass through. He's the gate. He's the walkway. He's the doorway, the curtain that everybody has to go through in order to come to understanding of who God is, in order to see him. So, with that said, and you can kind of see it here in this, maybe we should go to the next slide, and you can show it here as well. On this particular slide, this is from a different perspective. Of course, this is the east is down on the lower section, and that's the camp of Judah. We talked about the camp of Judah being made up of Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Camp of Reuben is being made up of Reuben, Simeon, and Gad. Camp of Ephraim being made up of Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And it was pointed out the sons of Rachel specifically, or at least grandsons of Rachel. And then you have the camp of Dan, which is made up of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. So when you look on the east side, you'll see that the sons of Aaron and Moses and Aaron are right there in front of the tabernacle. And then you have the other sons of the Levites, the Koathightes, the Gershonites, and the Merorites. They're surrounded on the other side, so on the northwest and on the south side of the tabernacle. So if there's a stranger who comes near there, especially in the area toward the front of the tabernacle through that door, if they're a stranger that they shouldn't be there, they're supposed to be killed, which is again pretty alarming. You could just say, well, hey, I just wanted to check out God, see what was going on with God. Well, you're not allowed to do that under this particular system. There's a manner in which you come to a relationship with God, but under this, you would have to enter in through that gate, and you have to be of the right type, the right person to come through. And this is what was just amazing through, like John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. So that whosoever would believe wouldn't perish but have everlasting life. We need to open that door. It's getting too...
They're open.
Are they both open? Really? Okay, maybe we need to make a change to that. So, okay. So we come to verse 11, and here we see where the Levites are going to be changed in... They're going to be in place of the firstborn of Israel. And we'll actually come to that count later, but it is pretty interesting how it works. So, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, For I, behold, have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel instead of all the firstborn that opened the matrix among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites are mine. Because all the firstborn are mine, for on the day that I smote all of the firstborn of the land of Egypt, I hallowed unto me all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast, mine shall they be. I am the Lord. So here's where God is saying, you remember Egypt, he, because of the blood on the doorpost, that all the firstborn were spared of Israel. And whereas in Egypt, all the firstborn of Egypt perished, right? So that blood on the doorpost, yes, it saved, it prevented that death from happening, but then God in turn said all the firstborn of the cattle, the firstborn of the of Israel, of each family, are mine. He's laying claim to them. He says they are mine, and you'll remember that there was a tax that was given that all the firstborn that they were supposed to pay 5 shekel tax according to the Tabernacle shekel. Okay, so that's going to come back around here for us to look at, but at this point there's just the declaration that the firstborn are God's, and so what he's doing is instead of actually the firstborn being brought into the service, he's saying instead, I'm going to take the Levites in substitution for the firstborn, and we'll see that there's an actual difference of number. There's going to be a count of the firstborn, just as there's the count of the Levites, and then there will be a reckoning of the difference of the number of people. So we'll come to that here, but this is where it's being laid out, and specifically the verse having to do with this is in Exodus 13, where it says, "Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of beast is mine." And this is where God declares it to Israel and the people, and to Moses, of course, but the children of Israel. So now we have the numbering of the Levites. So in verse 14, "And the Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, saying, Number the children of Levi after the house of their fathers by their families, every male from a month old and upward shall thou number them." So that's interesting, isn't it? Because the rest of Israel, it was the men who were 20 years old and up, they were being set apart to go into battle. So anyone that was 20 years old and up, they were to be counted. But with the Levites, it's interesting because here with the Levites, it's it's just a little bit different here. It says a month old and upward. There's no cap. It's just a month old and upward that they are dedicated to the work in the temple specifically, and they are going to be in exchange for all of the firstborn from a month old. So you could say, well, what's a month old going to do? Well, it doesn't really matter, that they are already designated or set apart from 1 month old to be in the service of the Lord. When does the service start? Well, in the next chapter, chapter 4, it tells us that they actually enter into service at the age of 30 and they serve till they're 50. So they put in their 20 years and then they've got retirement, right? That they serve for that amount of time. But the time between when they're 1 month old and when they're 30 is a time of preparation. It's preparation, which is interesting because, sometimes a lot of times in our culture, we just say, hey, let kids play and let them have a fun time, and we don't really think about what they're going to be and what they're going to do. Not with a Levite child, not with a Levite boy. From the time that they're 1 month old, they are being groomed for the service of the temple. And there are 3 different main tribes of the Levites, the Koathites, Gershonites, and the Merorites, that have different roles having to do with the tabernacle. But nevertheless, they are being groomed to serve in the tabernacle, later in the temple. And it's really, really interesting how it works. So from 1 month old, they're being trained. So if we thought about our own children, what did we do with our own kids? How are we training them up? Do we see them at a 1 month old and say, okay, I'm going to start pouring into them the person of Jesus, start pouring into them the necessity that their lives are sanctified and set apart to serve God all the days of their lives. Yes, maybe they'll have a specific time between their 30 and 50, but then after they're 50, what are you doing after you're 50? Well, you're training these kids who aren't 30 years old yet. You're training them, and you're involved in that process of bringing them up and serving them and ministering to them. So that they'll be able to come into that service and be ready to go at 30 years old. So anyway, it's really interesting, and that we would, employ these things. That we would say, you know what, my son has been dedicated to the Lord. What's that mean? I dedicated my son to the Lord, but what's it really mean? Did you really dedicate him? If he's really dedicated to the Lord, then that means you're pouring into him with the intent that he's entering into the service of the Lord, to serve the Lord all the days of his life. So, as we move on here, we see this numbering, and then we're going to see the numbering based upon the tribes themselves. So we're going to have the identification of the tribes, or the sons of Levi. So Moses numbered them according to the word of the Lord as he was commanded, and these are the sons of Levi by their names: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Verse 18, and these are the names of the sons of Gershon by their families. So Libni and Shimei, and the sons of Kohath by their families. So it would be Amram and Issachar, Hebron, and Uzziel. And then verse 20, and the sons of Merari by their families. So Mali and Mushi. I don't know, they didn't do so good on their naming of the kids there, Mali and Mushi, but whatever. Maybe those are cute in those... For that time, I don't know if I'd want to be called Molly or Mushi, but nevertheless, these are the families of the Levites according to the house of their fathers. Now we're going to talk about the Gershonites and their specific roles, and and how many there are, and so on. So of Gershon was the family of the Libnites, and the family of the Shemites, and the family of the Gershonites. So those that were numbered of them, according to the number of all the males from a month upward, even they that were numbered of them were 7,500. So 7,500. And then it tells us that, it tells us in verse 23 that they were to pitch behind the tabernacle westward. So they're going to be on the opposite side of where Moses and Aaron and the children of Aaron. Moses and Aaron's children are. They're going to be on the opposite side, which is what you see here. And I made reference to it last time that that area specifically, there's a reference in in Joshua having to do with the distance from the tabernacle that the rest of the camp is supposed to be. So it's supposed to be 2,000 cubits, which is a Sabbath mile, or a Sabbath walk, and that's the area. And so that's what those numbers are, 2,000 cubits on that particular slide. So you have the Gershonites all the way on the other side, and it continues here having to do with them. And the chief of the house, let's see, of the father of the Gershonites shall be Eliasaph the son of Lael. So this made more sense to them than it makes to us. I suppose we could dive into the names and see if there's some significance to the meaning of the names, but we didn't. So if you want to do that, then I'd encourage you to check it out and let us know what you come up with. So, but in verse 25 it goes on and says, "In the charge of the sons of Gershon in the tabernacle of the congregation shall be the tabernacle, the tent, the covering thereof, the hanging for the door of the tabernacle of congregation, and the hangings of the court, and the curtain for the door of the court, which is by the tabernacle, and by the altar round about, and the cords for it, and all the service thereof." So keep in mind, the Gershonites, there's 7,500 of them, and their role is basically the fabrics and the coverings of the tabernacle. They have a specific role. They're sort of soft lines. I think if you work in retail, they're in the soft lines area, and then you'll end up finding that Merorites are in the hard lines area. They're going to take care of the structure of the building more. So we'll get to that, but let's go on with the Koathites. So the Koathites, they're the ones who take care of the furnishings of the sanctuary specifically. So in verse 27, it says, "And Kohath was of the family of the Amramites, of the family of the Zeraharites, and the family of the Hebronites, and the family of the Uzzielites." These are the children of Kohath. Okay, so I'm not going to keep going on that. I'm doing a terrible job trying to pronounce their names. But in verse 28 it says, "In the number of the males from a month old and upward were 8,600. So 8,600, and keeping charge of the sanctuary. And they were to pitch on the side of the tabernacle southward. So southward, you can kind of see that would be to the left, or that would be at the 9 o'clock direction, if the tabernacle were a clock itself. So that said, it goes on and it says, "And the chief of the house of the father of the families of the Kohathites will be Eliasaphan, the son of Uzziel. And their charge shall be the ark, the table, the candlestick, the altars, the vessels of the sanctuary wherewith they minister, the hanging, and all the service thereof." So basically everything that's inside, all of the furnishings, that's their job. And so we'll end up finding out more about this next week and so on. But when they would tear down the tabernacle, so keep in mind, let's get the dates again, right? So on the 14th of the first month of the first year, Passover, they leave. And then by the time we get to the first month, first day of the month, that's when the consecration of the priests takes place. So not even a year passes, and then you have the 7 days of consecration for the priests. On the 8th day, that's when the tabernacle is filled with the glory of God, but then that's also when Nadab and Abihu do their thing and they're killed. By the time we get to, pretty much on the 20th day of the second month is when they're moving back out. So they're only going to end up having the tabernacle pitched for, 40 days? 45 days. And then what's going to happen after the Lord ends up moving, then they have to break it all down. And so what you have is Moses, actually Aaron and the sons of Aaron, they go into the holy place, and then they take the curtain that's there, and they take that curtain without looking upon the Ark of the Covenant. They take the curtain and fold it over the Ark of the Covenant. And then once that's set up, and once they have the various articles like taking care of the altar, and that's cleaned up, all these things are done, then that's where the Koathites, who we're studying right now or looking at, that's when the Koathites come in and they take those articles out. They take the Ark of the Covenant out with Moses and Aaron and Aaron's sons, and they begin to lead from there, the procession. And then, as we saw last week, then the camp of Judah goes out after them, and then we'll see more of that breakdown when we get to, I think, Numbers chapter 10. So all of that said, it's very interesting how they do this, but the main thing is that even though the Koathites are in charge of all of those temple furnishings, they never see them. They never see them. They just care for them. They have the staves, they carry them, they move them, but they never see them. And the reason being is if they saw them or if they touched them, they would die. So they're all covered up, they're all protected, and their job is to just transport these things. So that's the Koathites. And then we have a quick little paragraph about Eleazar, and it says, "Eleazar the son of Aaron, the priest, shall be chief over the chiefs of the chief over the chief of the Levites and have oversight of them that keep the charge of the sanctuary. So Aaron is the high priest. So he is going to just do high priest things. His son, Eleazar, is the one that oversees the whole production. He's the production manager of the whole thing. When it comes time to move, he's the one that makes sure everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. So he's the chief over all the chiefs. And you'll remember that, like in verse 30, it's for the Koathites, there's the chief, the person that's going to oversee the Koathites. So they've got order there. They've got a person that oversees that set of Levites, the Koathites. You've got a leader there, but then of those three leaders, they are all accountable to Eleazar, the third son of Aaron, who's now the top son of Aaron because Nadab and Abihu died. Does that make sense? So, all right. Now we come to the Merorites, and they're going to be on the north side. They take care of the structural aspects of the tabernacle, and there's 6,200 of them. So let's see, we'll go to, how about verse 34? And those that were numbered of them according to the number of all the males from a month old and upward, and that's consistent, were 6,200. And it talks about the chief of the house of Merari there, and then it says that they're going to pitch on the north side or northward of the tabernacle. So they're going to be on the right side. If you wanted to look at where Moses and Aaron are, they're going to be on the right side. Koathites are on the left side, and then the Gershonites are on the other side of the tabernacle. All right, so what is their charge? It says, under the custody and charge of the sons of Merari shall be the boards of the tabernacle. So remember, what's with the boards of the tabernacle? They are shittim wood, or like acacia wood that's covered on both sides all around with gold. And then they take these boards and they have these little, it's like slots or tongues, I guess you could say, and then they go into these sockets. There's these silver sockets, and there's two silver, or on each board you've got two little tongues that go into the sockets, right? And each one of these sockets are silver. They're 100 pounds of silver, and so that's the base. And it's interesting because if you'll remember when we went through this, that the sockets, being silver, they represent the blood of Christ. That anytime you see silver, it represents blood. So the whole foundation of the tabernacle is standing or resting on the blood, so to speak, being all silver all around. So you take these boards, which are all gold, or not all gold, but covered in gold, and they go in these sockets, and that's what makes up the tabernacle itself. So when you walk in, you see gold walls, and then on the top you see a fabric that goes over the top that's sort of blue, and it has pomegranates, and it's got these things stitched in. It's really beautiful, but that's on the inside. From the outside, it ends up being covered with goat skins afterward, and then you'll remember it's covered with porpoise skin, badger skins, or porpoise skins, and so from the outside it's kind of ugly looking, but on the inside it's something that's glorious and wonderful and just amazing. And so again, speaking in terms of Jesus, where they said he had no form or comeliness, outwardly he wasn't someone that you would be attracted to, just like the tabernacle, but as you began to get to know him, you would find this is awesome, this is glorious to know who Jesus is. So anyway, with that said, the Merorites, there were 6,200, and they were in charge of the boards and the bars and the pillars and the sockets, those 100-pound silver sockets. Can you imagine that it's your job to carry these sockets? They're dragging these things. You're thinking, man, I hope that the Lord doesn't travel too far the pillar of cloud. If it's miles, you can imagine how difficult carrying these sockets would be. But anyway, they're to take care of those, and then the pillars of the court round about. So you have the outer part of the court, where the sort of like the fence on the outside, or the area. You've got the tabernacle in the middle. This isn't as good of a picture in this, but you've got the tabernacle in the middle, and then you have the outer part of the court. You can change it. That's fine. Go ahead and change it to the third one. Yeah, put it on the third, and so in this one it's a little better representation, I guess. But you have the outer court area there. You've got the tabernacle itself, and then you've got the outer court. So they have charge of all of the structural things along that line. And it's supposed to be, even though they're on the interior there, that even 2,000 cubits past that is where the tribe of Dan and Judah, or the camp of Judah, Dan, and Reuben, and Ephraim begin. So anyway, all of that said, that's what they have charge over. So we've talked a little bit about the Merorites, and now we're going to talk about Moses and Aaron. They're to the east, and it says in verse 38, but those that encamp before the tabernacle toward the east, even before the tabernacle of the congregation eastward, shall be Moses and Aaron and his sons, keeping charge of the sanctuary, for the charge of the children of Israel, and the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death. So again, that's the second time it's emphasized. It's saying, no strangers, no coming near to the Holy of Holies or into the tabernacle area itself, otherwise punishable by death. Okay, verse 39, the actual count of the Levites. And all that were numbered of the Levites, which Moses and Aaron numbered at the commandment of the Lord throughout their families, and all the males from a month old and upward, were 22,000. So 22,000 Levites. Now, the numbering of the firstborn, verse 40. And the Lord said unto Moses, number all the firstborn of the males of the children of Israel from a month old and upward. So here, the numbering of the firstborn begins at a month old, just like the Levites. So it's a little bit different than being 20 years old, but they're just trying to get a number for the firstborn. And take the number of their names. And thou shalt take the Levites for me, I am the Lord, instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel. So again, there's this exchange. Instead of the firstborn, the Levites are going to cover the firstborn, and the cattle of the Levites instead of all the firstlings among the cattle of the children of Israel. So there's not much talked about the cattle, but there definitely is much talked about. We're just going to, it's sort of assumed that the number of the cattle will be equalized, right? So that they'll get the correct number of the cattle to match up. But then it says in verse 42, Moses numbered and as the Lord commanded all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and the firstborn males by the number of the names from a month old and upward of those that were numbered of them was 22,000, and then it's King James, 213. So 22,273. So the difference is 273 people. You have 273 firstborn, and you have 273 Levites. So, the last couple verses here, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, take the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and of the cattle of the Levites instead of their cattle. And the Levites shall be mine, I am the Lord. So they swap cattle. So whatever the Levites had, they give to the children of Israel, and then children of Israel give them their cattle. And then it goes on and it says, and for those that are to be redeemed of the 213 of the firstborn of the children of Israel, which are more than the Levites, thou shalt take 5 shekels apiece by the poll after the shekel of the sanctuary shalt thou take them. And just for our records, a shekel is 20 gerahs. It's helpful, isn't it? So it goes on in verse 48, it says, "And thou shalt give the money wherewith the odd number of them is to be redeemed unto Aaron and to his son." So the redemption money here we see is going to end up being 273 times 5 shekels. So it's going to be 1,365 shekels. So Moses took the redemption money that of them that were over and above them that were redeemed of the Levites. Of the firstborn of the children of Israel took he the money 1,365 shekels after the shekel of the sanctuary. So basically they took those shekels and then it says, "And Moses gave the money of them that were redeemed unto Aaron and to his sons according to the word of the Lord, as the Lord commanded Moses." So all of the firstborn now are redeemed. It's even, and now you have the Levites representing the firstborn. Now you'll remember when they were building the tabernacle, every male had to give 5 shekels for the building of the tabernacle. It was like a tax that was given. 5 shekels isn't that much, but that was what was given, and then they used that for the building of the tabernacle. So that is the camp of the Levites. And hopefully there were some cool insights there that you'll remember and that will stick with you. Maybe we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to ask you questions about that here in a minute, and we'll go from there. But it's pretty glorious how you see the differences and how everybody has that role. Everybody has something that they are supposed to do. And I guess the close of that is to think about that having to do with the church. You know, everyone has a different role. Everybody has a place within the church. If we're in the church, we're not serving, there's something wrong. You know, we all need to be serving. We all need to be involved. We all need to be doing some part of it. And for some, it's carrying around 100-pound sockets. And for others, it's taking care of the soft lines, and for others it's taking care of perhaps some of the more intricate things having to do with things that are related to the worship, and then there's those who are involved in the actual ministry of the word and so on. But everybody should be involved. Everybody should be engaged in the work of the ministry, and that starts. Everybody is either being trained from a month old and up, or they're actually being involved in the work. So we should be considering what our role is, what the Lord wants us to do. And sometimes we don't even know, but you just see a need. And you might find that I didn't even know that I was interested in that sort of thing, but I'll go ahead and do it because there's a need. And then you find out that you really like it. Many times that's come up where just serving, you find that, you know what, I'm serving the Lord, and you begin to rejoice in just being able to serve the Lord, and then you discover that, when you're serving the Lord, it doesn't really matter what it is that you're doing so much, it's that you're just doing it. And it can be something that's very mundane, seemingly, or it could be something that gets some attention, but the bottom line is it's His glory anyway, so we just serve the Lord, and we look for those opportunities to be servants, to be available, to be willing to do whatever He calls us to do. So that's our close. Let's go ahead and close in prayer, and then we can talk more about some of these various things amongst ourselves. So Lord, may You be glorified. Thank You for the